Hello again. Today I'm going to be talking to you about charts 2.1 and 2.2 in Understanding and Using English Grammar by Betty Azar. If you don't have the book, or if you are using a different edition, the information will probably still be helpful for you. What we're talking about are what are called irregular verbs in English. So, to talk about what an irregular verb is, let's start by talking about the verbs that are not irregular, okay? The verbs that are not irregular are called regular verbs. So two kinds of verbs in English: regular verbs and irregular verbs. Now, let's talk about what makes these regular and what makes these irregular. The thing that we need to look at is, how do we make the past of these verbs? So let's look at walk. Take a minute, ask yourself, what's the past of walk? Okay, you probably knew that, right? The past of walk, let me write past here, is walked. Very good, okay. What's the past of fix? Take a minute and see if you know. Past of fix is fixed. And past of calm, the past of calm is calm. So, regular verbs make past by adding ed. So here, make the past by adding ed to the end. So for a regular verb, if I want to make it past, I just add ed to the end. Now, let's take a look at these verbs over here. These are irregular verbs. So, let's again take a look at the past of these. So, first one, past of eat. Ask yourself, what's the past of eat? If you need to pause to think, go ahead and pause. Okay, the past of eat is ate. All right, ask yourself, next word, buy. What's the past of buy? Past of buy is bought. And last one. This is not that common a word to use in the past, so see if you know it. What's the past of swim? The past of swim, pause if you need to. Past of swim is swam. S-W-A-M. Now, so notice these irregular verbs do not make the past by adding ed, okay? So regular verbs make past by adding ed. Irregular verbs do not use ed. So you may be asking yourself, okay, if irregular verbs don't add ed to make the past, how do I know what the past is? I'm sorry, I have some bad news for you. The bad news is there is no real rule. You pretty much just have to memorize. Now, after giving you bad news, I also have some good news. If you have this book, or you have another version of Understanding and Using English Grammar, there is a list of irregular verbs. It's not all of them in English, but it's many of them, and it's on pages 26 and 27. That's chart 2.2, okay? So, bad news, there's no rule. Good news, there's a list in the book. Also, if you're watching these videos and you don't have this book, just do a web search. Google irregular verbs in English, or English irregular verbs, and you can find whole big lists of them online. Okay? So, oh, I also have some more good news, bad news for you. The good news is there are more irregular verbs in English. There are more regular verbs in English than irregular verbs. There are more of these. The bad news is that the common verbs, the verbs that we use most, a lot of them, many of the common verbs we use are irregular verbs. There's a history reason for that, but you don't need to know that now. Okay, so we found out regular verbs make the past by adding ed. Irregular verbs don't use ed. You have to memorize the past. Now, let's talk about another form of verbs. In addition to the past form of a verb also has another form called, let me see here. I think I want to use a different color here, called past participle. And I'll write this over here too, past and past participle. Now, if you're using Understanding and Using English Grammar by Betty Azar, if you're using that book, you probably already know what a past participle is. But if you don't, or if you forgot, let's just review. Okay? Past participle, let me see if I can find a place to write here. And let me try to find a different color so that it'll be clear and coming up. Okay? The past participle equals the form of the verb I use after have. The form of the verb that I use after have is called the past participle. So let's take a look at the past participle of eat. So here I would say, yesterday I ate dinner. What would I say for past participle? I have what? The form that comes after have. What is the form of eat that comes after have? I have. Pause and think. Okay. If you know, great. If you didn't, the past participle is eaten. Notice that here for eat, the past participle eaten is different from the past. Okay? Good. Now, let's take a look at the next one. Buy. I bought some shoes. What form of buy do I use after have? I have, let me put eat here. What form of buy do I use after have? Take a minute and think. Ah, you're right. Or I hope you're right. I'm guessing you know. The past participle of buy is bought. Now, you might notice something a little strange here. For eat, the past participle is different from the past. For buy, the past participle is the same. They're both bought. And so, for irregular verbs, sometimes the past is the same as the past participle. Sometimes the past is different. It's another crazy thing about English, and I apologize right now for English. It's got some crazy difficult parts to it. And this won't be the last one we talk about. Anyway, if I am elected king of the world, I will make some law that says English must make sense. But until then. So some verbs, some irregular verbs, the past participle is the same as the past. Some irregular verbs, the past participle is, some irregular verbs, the past is different from the past participle, and some they're the same. Let's look at swim. Swim, swam, and if I want to make this after have, I have, what would I say there? I have swum. S-W-U-M. So swim has a different past and past participle. Swam with an A for the past, swum with a U for the past participle. Okay. Now, let's take a look at the regular verbs. Okay, so past participle. Walk and have. So I could say I walked to school, or I have walked. Okay? Let's look at fix. John fixed his car. John had. Oh, let's say John has. I could say, when I say it comes after the word have, has is the form of have that I use with he, she, it. But for right now, let's just use have. But I would also use past participle after have. Let me just write that here. The form that I use after have has, okay? Just so that's not confusing. So, John has, or I have. What form of fix comes after have? Fixed. And you might notice something. So far, the regular verbs always use ed for the past participle. And that is true 99.99999999999% of the time. In fact, in all of my life, I think I've only seen one verb where the past was ed and the past participle was something else. So don't worry about that. And then, again, have called. So, let's take a look at what we've learned so far. There are regular verbs and irregular verbs. Irregular verbs make the past by adding ed. Regular verbs also have a past participle, for all intents and purposes, that is the same as the past. They both end in ed. Okay? Irregular verbs don't form the past with ed. We have to memorize. For irregular verbs, sometimes the past participle is the same, like bought, and sometimes it's different, like eat and ate. Now, you might be sitting there and wondering, what's the difference between I walked and I have walked? How are they different? What does this mean? How is this meaning different from this? Or what's the difference between I ate and I have eaten? That's a really good question. And we are going to be looking at that question in the next few charts when we talk about what's called past participle. Not past participles, present perfect in English. Okay? Just a brief introduction to present perfect right now, or a few words before we start. Present perfect is a verb tense that many ESL students who are learning English as a second language. ESL means English as a second language. Many ESL students really do not like present perfect. And probably the main reason for that is that it has more than one meaning. This book teaches two meanings. There's actually about four. And we'll talk more about all of that a little bit later. But depending on how I use it, present perfect can have different meanings. And we will talk about those, or we'll talk about the first one of those meanings in our next video. Thanks for watching.